Hello. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to speak on the topic of bridging the gap in our schools in District 118. My name is Caitlin Megginson. I'm a teacher at our high school. I teach sophomore English and AP Literature. This is my 5th year in the district, and this is a subject that's really near and dear to my heart, so I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this topic. Well, I took our data from our high school and our demographic data, and this year we've been blessed really to have a data analyst, which has made it a lot easier to collect our data on how our students are doing and exactly what our population is. This is our first year as a majority minority school, and we really have had an ever-changing demographic in the past several years and even decades. We also have an ever-changing staff. This year we have over half of our certified teachers in either their first or second year. So really we just need to look at what this means for our students, that not only their town is changing, their peers are perhaps changing, and what our student looks like, their home lives, and also who their teachers are is changing as well, and what that means for them. Our reality is actually quite disturbing and shocking, but shouldn't be surprising. We have been on a steady decline for years, and which is why we qualified for the school improvement grant 2 years ago. We are now in our second year, but just knowing that we are not doing well, that our scores are declining overall, is not enough. And to look at the black and white numbers of our GPAs, of our achievement gap, is something that should keep you awake at night, as it does me. And looking at our students on free and reduced lunch, those on free lunch have an average GPA of 2.17. And our African American students have an average GPA of 2.16, something that is abysmal for our students who are hoping to go to college after school, even a vocational school, or perhaps get a career in this job market that requires so many analytical and critical thinking skills. Our other reality, the other side of this coin, is our discipline data, that our referrals are definitely skewed with our African American population having a total of 437 referrals as opposed to 336 for our white population. These students spend more time in refocus, more time in detention, and more time suspended, meaning that they are spending less time in the classroom, less time learning, less time getting the critical skills that they need so desperately. And what our data doesn't show. Now, to me, there are some glaring holes in our data as to how our very sizable Latino population is doing, what is their discipline data, and how are they identifying themselves now. With the federal race codes, they do not have a code for them. So how are they identifying themselves? Are they identifying themselves as white? Are they identifying themselves as American Indian? And making sure that these students have their own representation and have their own voice so that we can know how they are doing. And also our biracial population. We have a very sizable biracial population. These students may identify as only one of their ethnicities or races, or maybe they identify as 3 or more, but letting them voice that as that they are multi-ethnic, multiracial is very profound, empowering, and something that we need to do. We need to know how these students are doing on our core tests, on these standardized tests, ACT, PARCC, and even our school-wide Tier 2 SLO tests. And really, we are on par with the nation. The gaps between African American and Hispanic populations and white populations is over 2 grade levels. It is about 20 test score points, which when you think about it is really aligned with what we are seeing here in Danville and in District 118. Now, the blame game. And this is something that we hear all the time. We hear, well, I tried to talk to the student. They really just don't care about their subject. They don't care they're failing. They don't have any interest in it. Or it's the parental involvement. I tried to call home. The phone was disconnected. The parent moved. Wouldn't call me back. I left a message. Voicemail was full. Or, well, how do you expect me to teach these students at a freshman, sophomore, junior level, or even 5th or 6th grade level when their skills are so deficit, when they are reading at a 3rd grade level and performing math at a 2nd grade level? How am I supposed to catch them up to their peers and where they should be? And so I know as a high school teacher, we have definitely been guilty of blaming the middle school, the elementary school. It's always the teacher ahead of you. Well, if they had only fixed the problem, or if the parents were only involved at home. But really, it's not about blaming. The causes are really interdependent and really all are specific to the student. So why have we let it get this bad? Whites are less likely to be aware of an achievement gap and to believe that the government has anything to do with it. When I read this article from Karen Steiger, I was taken completely aback. The reality that we are unaware or that we don't feel that we have a hand in this is completely absurd and appalling to me, and I hope that we can fix that here in District 118. Our causes. Now, to use a math analogy, I think that for each student, the cause of their achievement is really almost a formula of either 1, 2, 3, or more of these factors, and perhaps even other specific factors just to them. But poverty, parental involvement, early childhood learning lags, children born in poverty, their language is usually lagging by the time they're 3 years old, cultural relevancy in the classroom, teacher preparation, money spent per student in the classroom. I mean, we all know how hard it is to get funding for public education, let alone in a low-income district or trying to spend per student. Class sizes. This year I had a class of 39 sophomores. I know that kindergarten is very similar, where they have 35 or more in one classroom. And then of course our standardized tests are changing, going from ACT and the prep program to PARC and those computer-based tests, but also the questions that they ask and the way in which they ask them. So, as I said, the causes really are interdependent and they really vary at different levels for the student. We may have a student who's mostly, his or her achievement is mostly caused by their growing up in poverty, more so than their early childhood learning lags. Perhaps they were fine and it's what's going on at home that is affecting their achievement, or perhaps it is the class sizes that they are in. They would do better in smaller classes, and it's really the class sizes. But most of these affect all of our students, but they especially affect our minority, our African American and Latino populations. What the research shows, this is again looking pretty much at the same factors, but what I liked about this was that it separated it into with what was in our control as a school and what was outside of our control. We can control what we can, right? We can control what happens in our school. We can control our teachers. We can control our student-to-student factors and our family support of students' learning. What we can't control is our community community, our education funding shortfalls, there will always be educational funding shortfalls, and the family support of the learning. Now, we can try to influence that. We can encourage things. We can apply for grants. We can do all we can to influence what is out of our control, but really focusing on what happens once that student walks in that door is where we should start. And speaking with Angie Brown, who is an administrator at Northridge Middle School with a high Latino population, she really identified the causes in her school as misunderstandings of cultures. She said when she started teaching, she felt like she was on a learning curve, trying to speak to children who did not grow up in the same way that she did, and trying to find a common language and a common understanding of each other. She believes that the changes in how we question students, the fact that we, instead of saying, well, that's great, you know the answer is 2, we move on. We're instead asking them for textual evidence. We're asking them to cite their evidence. And even that change in vocabulary, she says, has affected her students' learning. And it's moving beyond what we were originally taught. We all remember when Ruby Payne was all the rage, and it was that children who grow up in poverty are inherently different. Unfortunately, all of her findings were racialized and not very scientific, but we were all taught Ruby Payne. We all believed that that would fix everything for a while, and it's moving beyond that. There is no one great solution. There's no magic solution, and Angie recognizes that, Mrs. Brown, and I believe that we all know that there is no magic seed that we can plant and create a tree of learning or something, as much as we'd all like to. She really saw the biggest solution as educating staff on how to speak to their students, how to be culturally relevant, and what constitutes behavior issues, especially in the classroom, for classroom management. What is disrespect, what is not, and speaking to and creating these understandings with your students, no matter where they've grown up or how they've grown up. She also believes more time spent with ELL teachers would be great for her Latino population. Currently, they meet on a weekly basis as the middle schools share an ELL teacher, and that ELL teacher will help them mostly on their homework and support what's going on in the classroom. She would like to see more targeted, skill-based interventions as far as what will be asked of them on standardized tests, on common assessments between their teachers, and making sure that they understand not only the background of a question, the vocabulary of that question, and then how to answer that question. And speaking with Jacob Bretz, the assistant principal at the high school, he really saw the causes was lying with the schools. He noted that we can't control what happens outside of the school. We can encourage it, we can influence it as much as we can, but really we have to focus on what happens once those students get off the school bus in the morning. He said that the causes had really to do with how the schools encourage involvement or positive experiences at the school, not only for their students, but also for their parents. And that schools really didn't know how to teach different students other than themselves. I mean, how many of us go back to, well, this is what happened to me when I was in high school, and this is what I did when I was in high school, or in middle school, or in elementary school, and I remember we did this really cool project, so I'm going to do this cool project, whether or not it's aligned to standards, or we think that our students might actually benefit from it. It was fun for us once, we learned from it, but we have to take our values and our judgments out of how we teach, and do what's best for our students. He saw the solution as really more curriculum that relates to African American and Latino culture, that these students need to see role models and need to see heroes in their curriculum, that it's not just about reading about the same 3 or 4 African American or one Latino hero and then moving on. And that was it for the year. Discovering these new people and learning about them. And it's not just teaching Martin Luther King was really important to him. And he said we have to do it in a way that isn't disingenuous. It is not trying to insert their culture into the curriculum. It's not creating a curriculum and then sprinkling culture on it. It's fitting the curriculum into their culture. It's changing the way that we look at how we teach and what we teach in order to match where they come from. That we are what needs to change, not them. My proposed solutions for District 118 are to encourage parental involvement through our parent university nights, continuing those, so that these parents have positive experiences with the school. How many parents do we know only get negative phone calls home about their students? Johnny did this today. Oh, Johnny's failing this class. And how many of those students just stop answering the phone? And then we wonder why. Well, most of these parents didn't have good experiences while they were in school and aren't having good experiences as parents in this district. So we need to encourage this parental involvement. We need to encourage parents to come to events at schools where we serve food, where we have these kind of shared communities with teachers, with parents, with students, and with even younger siblings and other community members. Encouraging talented student teachers to stay with signing bonuses. We have the benefit of being right in between the University of Illinois and Eastern University and receiving student teachers from both. But we need to encourage these teachers, the great ones, to stay. I believe we can do that with signing bonuses or these incentives for them. Of course, we can't make everyone stay, but right now, with over half of our teaching population being in either their first or second year at the high school, we need to do something to keep the good teachers here. Encouraging them, perhaps with incentives. We could even use the student growth model that we are piloting this year. What incentives can we build in for good teaching, for quality assessments, for quality learning in the classroom? These teachers need to be recognized and celebrated who are doing great work. We need to educate all our teachers on culturally relevant teaching, K through 12. So how does that fit in? How do we fit that curriculum into their culture, like Mr. Brett said? And then also proven behavior interventions. We need to fit our curriculum, fit our standards into their culture. Using programs like BIST or perhaps PBIS might be beneficial for our students. I know our middle schools have looked at PBIS, but making sure that we are implementing those wholeheartedly and doing all we can to support our students so that they spend the most time that they can in the classroom learning, not suspended in refocus or in school suspension. We need to align tests and curriculum vertically so that we know what it should look like when a freshman passes English. What skills should they have? Where should they be in their writing, in their arguments, and in their reading? And making sure that they're all aligned with Common Core state standards. If they aren't aligned with the standards, then we can't teach them. We need to make sure that we are only teaching these skill-based, proven methods. Okay, the soft skills, we need to leave that thinking. Homework is not the most beneficial thing for our students. What is beneficial is teaching them skills and then reteaching them those skills if they don't get them. So giving teachers those tools for reteaching and reassessing to make sure that they know at all times where their students stand in their learning, and make sure even better that the students know where they stand in their learning and where they can go so that they are empowered and have ownership in their education. Education should not be something that happens to you, but something that you take control of and you own. And then, of course, specific support for our minority students and their families, whether through a family liaison, family support, that we help these families, perhaps if we need, get up and stay on their feet. That we have these, we could be their conduit to the community, especially for our newly arrived students and their families, newly moved. Specifically for the lower grades, for our elementary, targeting for specific skills as defined by entry tests. We all know that there's a kindergarten entry test, but making sure that using that, that we're using that data, that we are not just collecting it, not just knowing where they are, but doing something about that so that they have more instructional time on those places where they are have a deficit. That they have flexible groupings and classes. We are not trying to track them starting from kindergarten or first grade, but making sure that they can weave in and out of groups or classes as to their preferences, as to their skills, and focusing on their strengths rather than their weaknesses. Targeted interventions for students who are starting to show a gap in their achievement from their peers. Culturally relevant learning. I can't stress this enough. Starting students well with culturally relevant learning, where they are, again, fitting the curriculum into their culture, not their culture into the curriculum, by showing them heroes, showing them role models, showing them how they can do it, showing them that we care about them, and focusing on their strengths, not trying to fit that square peg in a round hole. Parental involvement is encouraged through targeted methods, okay? It may not be sending letters home, or it may be sending letters home in every language. It might be inviting parents to book nights where they sit and read. It might be inviting students to Polar Express nights, 'tis the season, to be able to share an experience, a positive experience with their parents at school. And education for staff on teaching the whole child. Especially in our elementary schools, we need to focus on teaching the entire child and making sure that they are supported not only in their academic learning, but also their social emotional learning as well. And making sure that our teachers know how to prevent these gaps from widening during elementary school. It's so important that these students get all the help they need as young as we can. That their interventions are targeted, their reteaching is on point, and that we do all we can to make sure that our students are going to achieve to their full potential. For our higher grades, we really need to separate our data on the common assessments. We have common assessments. All teachers are supposed to teach the same standards and teach the same tests as their counterparts in other schools, or teaching the same grade level or class. So we need to separate the data. Then we need to fix our assessments to match the standards, essential skills, and be culturally relevant. So it's not just, well, I wrote this test, it works, I think it tests what it needs to. No, we need to make sure that it is a quality assessment, that it teaches, that it is an assessment for and of learning, and it really gets at the heart of what we need them to know, these essential skills. And then we will reteach them, retest them, and perhaps even reteach them again until they attain those skills. And then we'll analyze the data again. We really need to support these students with special circumstances. Right now, how many students do we have who are pregnant or have a child at home? And what supports do we have for them? We really have nothing. So not only do they have to be at school and perhaps have some issues with being at school, they then go home and have a whole other job to do, and we can't hold them to the same degree as we might a student who doesn't have these weights put upon them. That's not to say that they should be held to a lower standard. What I'm saying is that equal is not, or what's fair is not what's always equal. And we need to make sure that all students have an equal opportunity, a fair opportunity at achieving their potential. We also need to concentrate on how our teachers are teaching and who's getting the best results. And this is where the incentives could come into play, that we are focusing on, well, why do you have an 80% passing rate? Why are you doing so well with your teaching? And why do you, perhaps, teacher B, have a 50% passing rate on the same assessment? And concentrating on methods that work, not wasting our time on what doesn't. And this is really backed by the research. Then we need to focus on standards that students in all high schools, whether low income or high income, need to be held to the same standard. And several studies that were done were by the educational researcher actually looked at what was taught in low-income schools, and were shocked by the amount of just busy work that low-income students were held to, that there was so much coloring, and that they even cited an example that an 11th grade teacher handed students To Kill a Mockingbird and then just asked them to make a movie poster of it when they were done. There was no critical thinking, there was no analysis. It was just literally create a movie poster for this. So what the same work that might receive a C or a D in a higher achieving school was receiving A's in those lower income districts, because we do not think that those students can achieve to the same level. We must expect the absolute best from all of our students, no matter their background. And all of these students have to be challenged. The curriculum must match the rigorous standards of the job market. Students need help when they're behind in skills. They need more time and more instruction. This makes sense, but it's not about moving on to the next thing. We need targeted interventions, whether it's time after school, time in the summer, or we build this time in where they can get these targeted interventions in reading, in math, in writing, or whatever skill perhaps they are deficient in, that they get these targeted interventions. And having the right teacher matters. They found that it was really good teaching that matters the most in our students' achievement. That it's not necessarily what happens at home, it's what happens in that classroom. That we need these experienced teachers who know their subject and who know how to teach it to be in the classroom, especially with our struggling students, especially with the students who need them the most. We do not need mediocre at best teachers, and unfortunately that has really been a national trend for low-income schools. In conclusion, we need good teaching of skills through a rigorous curriculum. The research really supports my suggestions for 118 on both the elementary level and the higher ed level. So we really need to focus on this problem, and as a group, as a board, and as a community, we need to solve this for us and by us. Thank you.